Welcome to the first episode of Focus 54 in the year 2024, and I am really glad that that rhymes, and thank you to the producers for putting that onto the script. Now, the predominant motif of 2024 appears to center on the question of leadership across Africa and the entire continent, and we'll be talking about that. Now, this is extending to South Africa, Algeria, Botswana, and some parts, and a significant portion of the region's nations, comprising a third of the total, are poised to set and elect new governments and authorities within the year. And I will be joined by two experts that will help us break it down into two major sectors, which is the political side of elections and the economic impact. Those are just two of many perspectives, but these are the two critical ones that we will be discussing later on within the program. And, notably, this roster of encompasses the likes of Mali, Chad, Burkina Faso, and nations that have had some political instabilities and military coups across the continent. Now, there is a total of 18 scheduled elections slated to transpire across Africa, and we won't be touching into each and every one of them, but to give you a general perspective split according to the regions, and a special focus on South Africa, which is a huge economic power that does impact most parts of Africa. Now, we kick off with some African news, where Nigeria, as the BBC Eye, and a documentary on the Synagogue Church of All Nations founder TB Joshua, which comes as a three-part documentary, has a lot of eyewitness perspectives and sort of like an expose, calling it a cult. And this tends to make us think about, the history of the synagogue church, which spans over 20 years, and, dozens of congregants have commented on this, and we would like your perspective of this. Is this a ploy to then talk about someone who is in his grave, or is this an expose just on emphatic leaders in terms of African religion, or is this an actual expose on the ills and the evils that might be happening in churches across Africa? And to move on, the Executive Board of International Monetary Fund, IMF, have successfully concluded the third revenue of Mozambique's 3-year loan program, and the development enables an immediate disbursement of approximately 60.7 million United States dollars to Maputo, according to the IMF. And the IMF affirmed in a statement that the program is exhibiting satisfactory performance, citing a notable decrease in inflationary pressures and notable acceleration of economic recovery. These are some of the stories that we will be talking about throughout this season, or this 2024 year on Africa, on Focus 54. This is your real African voice, and we'll be focusing on that. Stay tuned. We have a very, very heated second and third segment on African elections. Welcome back to Focus 54, the second edition, and like I did say, in the year 2024, we hit the ground running, and we hit straight to those hard-hitting issues on politics, the economy, security, and the welfare and well-being of Africans across the continent. Like we did say, this is an election year for several African countries, and if you were following previous episodes from the year 2023, we are all interconnected. What happens in one African country has an impact on what happens to all of us. And rightfully, we start off with two amazing guests this episode. And on the political side, one of our, I would say, resident voices who's always given us his political analysis, that's Dr. Chakanyuaka. And also joining us on the economic front, Economic Analyst Tapiwa Mutana, who's joining us. Gentlemen, welcome to Focus 54 and happy 2024.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you too.
We have talked about several issues on this show, but as we're getting into an election year for several African countries, what is the legal standard or the standard barometer that we use to measure an African election?
Of course, I think when we're looking at it from the continental level and also the global level, we do have international legal instruments that have been put in place by nations as a way of regulating the manner in which countries do conduct elections. But one thing that is important before we go to the international legal instruments is to understand that an election is a sovereign right, where an individual country determines how the elections are supposed to be conducted and done in terms of their laws. And I think Zimbabweans now really understand that particular concept after we had our own elections and that conversation about the role of SADC, the role of African Union, and Zimbabweans now, they do understand the importance of the domestic legal institutions in terms of conducting an elections. But of course, countries are members to international treaties, which in a way they have to implement these treaties by way of domesticating them. That is making sure that these treaties are aligned to their domestic laws. So I'll give you an example of some of the international or regional legal treaties that are there to govern the conduct of elections. So at global level, we have the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, Article 26, which stipulates that it is on the basis of, or the basis of power for the governance should be based on the will of the people. And then you also have the International Civil and Political the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 25, which again also provides that countries must genuinely conduct periodic elections after a certain provided period for their citizens to participate in the governance. But of course, now coming to the African continent, we do have the African Union Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance. And then we also have regional other instruments like the SADC. So these are generally the international legal instruments that are there, which guides the manner in which elections are conducted. But again, it also goes back to the domestic legal instruments.
So taking into what you've, I think also, I don't know if I'm summing it up semi-correctly, is that this is when you have observers coming in from, because you know when Zimbabweans, when we had elections, asked, why do we have so many observers? These are representatives from all these, organizations you did speak of, where they're just doing checks and balances if those mandates have been met. But to you, Tapiwa, I ask, the big question. We've spoken about African Free Trade Agreement areas, African emancipation economically, potentially the need for a Central African Bank as the best way for African agendas to move forward. But with these elections coming up in various countries, what are the economic, what is the economic landscape going to be like, particularly in terms of investment into the continent, business confidence, and economic policies for this year all the way until 2030?
Okay, thanks, Jeff, for the question. Basically, in an election environment, investors can adopt the wait and see approach. Let's wait and see how the outcome will be, who will get into power, what policies are they going to bring, and are they conducive, and are they aligned with their investment targets so that they invest. So basically, while we're looking at elections in Mozambique, in South Africa, in Ghana, in Algeria, this might have an effect of dampening investor confidence because they want to wait and see, right? And as Africans, we have seen a lot of political unrest, some political instability during election periods in various other countries. So that can also tend to disrupt trade between the countries and to put a halt or to slow down regional cooperation between countries, because basically each country will be focused on their own country, what's going to be the outcome of their election, and not what's going on next door.
So most countries have their hands full, like I've already mentioned. Various other countries are having elections this time around, this year in 2024.
2024 will feature South Africa, Ghana, Algeria as some of the hot ones.
Yeah.
Doc, in terms of, I have a theory that what happens in one nation affects the politics of what happens in the other. You can see that even within SADC, a change of leadership in Zambia changed policies, foreign policies and domestic policies for those that have friendships or trade agreements with Zambia. What will happen when things change in South Africa, in Ghana, and Algeria, particularly Algeria, because we did speak about Algeria last year?
Of course, what you have said, it's quite true that leaders would come and sometimes do change, policies in terms of international relations and how they relate with the different other countries. But I think the main issue now is on individual countries, the way they want to relate with other countries. I would give you an example of Zimbabwe per se. Our president has said we are an enemy to none and a friend to all, right? Yes. Which is a guiding principle in terms of our foreign policy. What this basically means is a change in South Africa is not likely to have an impact on the manner in which we relate.
I would like to argue that with
South Africa. No, because the reason why I'm saying this is, if we are going to maintain a friend to all and an enemy to none, the leaders that come to South Africa, it is now upon them to make a policy on Zimbabwe. But we are not going to change our policy because there is a government that we don't like or anything. We will continue to relate with them on a friendly basis, on a mutual respective basis. So these, on our own, it might not have an impact. But of course, different countries, I have said, they might, want to realign their foreign policy or realign in terms of relations with other different countries. That might actually also disrupt the current relations. But of course, I think in terms of African foreign policy, there seems to be maturity in terms of the manner in which we are handling issues at a continental level. When you have mentioned when we started about the African free trade continental area,
now we've got free movement of Africans across borders, yes?
So which I think these are platforms that are going to unify policies in terms of how we relate with each other. So the coming in of a new government might not necessarily have to disrupt relations within the African continent if we follow these laid down procedures.
Gentlemen, we will focus on South Africa on its own in the third segment, and I want to keep South Africa on the side because we are closely related to them and they are our neighbors. But speaking economically of countries such as Ghana, countries such as we did speak about countries such as Ghana and Algeria. In terms of the economics, there was a world summit that was held in that part of the world in Algeria last year, and we also have Ghana as one of the big superpowers in West Africa. Yeah. In terms of the economics, we know the Sahel region and other have been a bit unstable economically because of political instability. But in terms of the economics, what are the opportunities that stand for all Africans? We've seen Rwanda as a shining example of open borders, open policies, a renaissance in the way they do things. How are we going to see some potential positive changes in that region?
Yes, you have already mentioned about Rwanda shining as it is, and most people migrating to Rwanda to seek greener pastures. This will also be the same situation with Ghana and Algeria. Ghana is already also a growing economy, and we expect to see many immigrants going to Ghana after the elections, because in Ghana, the aspiring president is not the incumbent one. The incumbent one was beaten in primary elections. So the vice president is now stepping up to go to the helm, and is promising free education for high school students and other things, promising leveraging on technology, which of the policies which are aimed at empowering the youth. And in Africa, we do know that the youth are the voter, because Africa is a peculiar continent in the way that we have a growing population, unlike in other continents where you see an aging population. We also expect to see some economic stability, some FDI being attracted in Ghana.
In terms of the credibility and sustainability of and stability of these economies, What is the world thinking about these African countries? Are these policies sustainable, or they're just as sustainable as the tenure of those in power?
Yes, that's my take. The policies are just as good as the men in power. When the men in power leaves, the policies are also likely going to change, because these policies are implemented by human beings who are at the helm of ministries, who are in parliament. And most of the policies they craft, especially with regards to foreign direct investment, with regards to investors from other countries, they will mostly be aimed at, they will be specific to that set of people in power. When a new person comes now into power, they will bring their own policies, like we've seen in the past. Africa is considered high risk because of policy inconsistencies. So basically, in as much as the political landscape has improved, we are still perceived to, there is still some thoughts that Africa is still high risk in as much as policies are concerned.
And Doc, as we just close off the second segment, he spoke about, Tapiwa spoke about the issue of policies changing, but we have certain countries such as Zimbabwe with a Vision 2030, where projects, even from the First Republic to the Second Republic, are continuing, they're being amplified, and there's a trajectory and an actual plan to finish these. Is this African mindset going to spread across these nations, or it'll always just be our thing?
I think, what he said that, we are considered a risky continent usually comes from those who are perceived as, usually former colonizers, those of the enemies of the African countries, who wants to portray an African continent as a risky country, so that they paint Africans as, having, no ability at all to govern themselves.
That old stereotype.
Yes, that old stereotype and so forth and so forth. Because when you look at it, there has been consistency in a number of countries in terms of the manner which they have conducted their elections. Look at South Africa, for example. It has held its elections since 1994, but there is progress in South Africa in terms of the democracy. Look at Botswana there. Also in terms of ratings, in terms of democracy, it's actually highly rated. Ghana, they've done remarkably well. They moved from having coups and so forth, and now they have a proper democracy where elections are held regularly. Those who lose power actually leave, and the new elected leaders come into power. So we are seeing there is really progress in terms of the manner in which we have conducted ourselves as an African continent. And in terms of policy, I think overall across the board, we can talk of policy consistency now, actually, showing. You have given an example of Zimbabwe, where we are talking of an agenda 2030, which might actually be there for another, more than 5 years, and which means we as a country are pushing towards achieving that particular agenda. So irrespective of who is in power and so forth, it's an agenda that every Zimbabwean is trying to push. And when you look at a number of African countries, we are moving towards that particular direction. But this issue of people who sees Africa is a risk area. Usually
that one should end. So you know what, Doc, sorry to cut you short, but we're going to take a short break, and we're getting into that heated third segment, and I know that the three of us will not completely agree, but we'll reach some sort of consensus, as we'll be focusing on South Africa, the South African election, which is right next door. Stay tuned for more. Welcome back to the third segment of Focus 54. We have been discussing the political and the economic side of elections that are coming through across African countries, but we thought that it's ideal that we have a special preference and a focus on the South African election. Gentlemen, this is a little bit of a different one on the political side, on the economic side. We spoke about green economies, African emancipation. We also had issues such as BRICS happening last year, which was very exciting. And now we have quite a number of names in the South African election. First of all, Doc, how does the South African election impact Zimbabwe? Looking at some of the names that will be thrown forward. We have Julius Malema, with the EFF. We have former President Jacob Zuma with Umkhonto we Sizwe which is coming through. We have sitting president Cyril Ramaphosa in there, and very vocal and very viral candidate, Gayton Mackenzie, just to name a few. Yeah. And all of these people that are coming through have different perspectives of how they want to lead South Africa. Ramaphosa, big on economics. Zuma, big on the traditions and the founding, revolutionary principles of South Africa. These are my perspectives. Gayton Mackenzie wants to outdo the wrongs that he believes are being done. And Julius Malema, we know him, radical, pro-Pan-Africanist, young movement, and he's quite a very emphatic character. What do you think will happen when the probables of the South African election and the impact on Zimbabwe and the rest of the continent?
Yeah, of course, South Africa is a very important ally and neighbor of Zimbabwe. And of course, everything that happens in South Africa usually has an impact on us, because they are our neighbor and one of our, biggest trading partners. And we also have a sizable number of our citizens who are resident in South Africa. So policies in South Africa that affect our citizens who are in South Africa also have an impact on us, or policies that impact on trade would also have an impact on us. But when we look at the political parties that are currently there and the manner in which we have perhaps related with them, there is a history that cannot be, deleted between Zimbabwe and South Africa. If we go back into the history, our relations are not only starting from today, but they go way back into the colonial period.
We attained independence first.
Yes.
And some South Africans, I think, I was actually told by a man that I won't mention, but he was a retired engineer from from Air Zimbabwe, and he told us that they used to train engineers and pilots in Zimbabwe, and ICT people used to learn from Zimbabwe and go back to South Africa. Is this some of those historical relations we had?
Yes. So I'm saying people might want to deny it, but we are one people. We fought together when we were fighting against colonialism. So that particular aspect of history will continue to bind us together. So whoever is going to come, you remember sometimes when politicians are making statements, they are making statements that sometimes are not realistic to implement when it comes to the implementation aspect. They want to appear as if they are, coming in with new ideas and populistic ideas, which in actual fact might not be able, easily implementable. Because if you have someone who comes and say, well, if I become a president, I'm going to, chase away all Zimbabweans, is that realistic? It's not even realistic. You can't even do that. Why? It's because of the economic relations or the contribution that the Zimbabweans are doing in South Africa.
Are some of these politicians not just trying to find emotional relevance?
That's why I'm saying
to a certain segment?
You see, you are trying to use emotions as a way of gaining support, but saying things that you actually know that it's not realistic when it comes to the implementation. And our relations, I don't think will be affected by what these politicians would say, but will be affected by the real policies that a country will be making. Because in as much as South Africa is important to us, we are also equally important to South Africa. South Africa cannot also exist without us, as we cannot exist without it, because we are neighbors.
Now Tapiwa will also agree with me on this one, that the relationship between Zimbabwe as the gateway to the rest of Africa through the border to Beitbridge is very important. Even at the height of COVID-19, when the borders were semi-closed, the critical and essentials traveled through the two countries. There was the manipulation of the rand that is well documented, and I know cross-border traders in the SADC region love it when the rand drops, especially if you're coming from a US dollar economy. With new policies coming through, potentially some adjustments in the South African economy when the election is done, what do you expect is going to be the impact on the rest of Africa from Zimbabwe all the way to the north?
All right. In as much as we do have a strong history with South Africa, and the history cannot be undone by anything. But that one Gayton Mackenzie's sentiments and political chants are instilling a sense of uprising, a sense of hostility towards foreigners, making them believe that foreigners are actually the problem in South Africa, when actually they also contribute to the growth of South Africa as much as South Africans do, or even more than what South Africans do. So these South African elections will have far-reaching consequences, especially with regards to Zimbabwe, when we have one presidential candidate basing their campaign strategy on returning Zimbabweans home, when we have between 1 and 3 million Zimbabweans living there, and we are giving them in excess of 3 billion of business per annum. So we are expecting some far-reaching consequences, starting from the return of immigrants there in South Africa. Our brothers and sisters who are there might fear for their lives and they might come back. And should the unlikely event of political instability, uprising, protests materialize, our brothers and sisters, some of them are self-employed. They might not be able to go and work for themselves and remit, and those remittances are actually a significant portion of Zimbabwe's cash inflows. So that's something that we expect. If there is political instability in South Africa, definitely remittances are going to reduce. And Zimbabwe is also a giant in terms of tourism here in Africa. We expect a reduction of revenues with regards to tourism, because most flights coming to Zimbabwe connect through South Africa. And South Africa is a gateway to Zimbabwe.
So you're saying that unfriendly policies are likely to then also open up gateways for other countries such as Ghana. I know Egypt is now big on medication, and all these other countries. So what are we saying? What is the forecast as we close off the show?
But firstly, I think I just wanted to respond to some of the things that he said. I think we are over-exaggerating the impact of some of these politicians. Countries' policies cannot just simply be changed because of statements that are made at a political rally. This could just simply be political banter. Of course, politicians might have an influence on the people in the manner in which they would react to situations and so forth. But we can't over-exaggerate the impact these people they might have, because some of them, they are not even popular in terms of
their own country,
in their own country, that they don't even have people, followers, many followers. So they will just say a statement that will be captured by 1 or 2 people, but will not in any way really have an impact. So I don't think the elections in South Africa would have far-reaching consequences on us as Zimbabweans, because it's just a simple event. South Africa has been conducting elections since 1994, and up to now we haven't had any serious challenge in terms of the manner in which we relate with that particular country. So to think that this year's elections will have far-reaching consequences, I think we are over-exaggerating. It's just a normal elections. We conducted our elections recently, and they went on smoothly. People thought that these elections are going to be violent. People thought these elections are going to be, in any way negative. But that didn't happen. So the same way could also happen in South Africa. These are elections. Mozambique is also conducting its election this year. Botswana is also having their election this year. There's nothing special about some of these South African.
I mean, the DRC,
leaders,
which has 130.
Exactly.
Conflict groups.
Yes.
Had a very smooth running election with Dr. Tshisekedi, winning about, I believe, well over 70% of the vote.
So the elections in South Africa are just going to be an event that is going to come, and it will go, and the relations will continue. People will continue to live their lives, and that's it.
True. I would like to agree with Doc, but I would also like to add on something. In the past years, ANC has been winning with a bigger margin compared to the past election where DA was closing in, and EFF also has an increasing stake as well. So there are dynamics where there is potential shift of power in South Africa. So that tends to change everything, or some of the things we have seen in the past, since other political parties are approaching and we have had new entrants into the political arena. And some of these political chants which are said, let's return Zimbabweans home, it is only the enlightened South African who understands the value of Zimbabweans in South Africa.
And other foreigners as well, yes.
True. But when it comes to the general population, the majority of the population, they might not be as enlightened as the CEOs, the formerly employed ones, because we also have high unemployment rates in South Africa, and the average South African would say these are Zimbabweans, and now they have someone who's motivating them to say Zimbabweans and foreigners should go back home. So to a certain extent, there is a level of change with regards to South African elections and the dynamics they're in.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much, and I believe that we have torched a storm of discussions from various perspectives, from the emotional side of things, from academia, and from many analysts across the continent. What do you think the political and economic landscape of elections will be across Africa? Please do reach out to us on our Facebook page, that is ZBC News Online, and if you want to have references to some of the statistics and discussions we've had on various things, such as sustainable development goals across the country, cultural perspectives, economic perspectives, and that general shift in the African continent, please follow and watch previous episodes of Focus 54 on our Facebook page. My name is Jeffrey Murumbeche. Big thank you to our two guests for coming through. We hope we'll have them later on as the election season unfolds. But for now, it is a goodbye from us, and thank you so much for watching.